It was supposed to be a simple shopping trip, one that she had done countless times before. The bright chandeliers sparkled overhead as she stepped through the grand entrance of the luxury boutique, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Everything about the store radiated exclusivity, from the carefully arranged designer handbags to the neatly folded couture dresses behind glass cases. The scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. But within minutes of stepping inside, she felt it: the stares, the whispers, the uneasy glances from store employees who, instead of greeting her with the warm smiles reserved for their elite clientele, exchanged suspicious looks among themselves. She ignored it at first, brushing it off as nothing more than another day of existing in spaces where people like her were often unwelcome. She walked with confidence, her presence commanding attention whether she wanted it or not. Dressed in a perfectly tailored designer jumpsuit, her jewelry subtle, yet unmistakably expensive, she exuded the kind of quiet luxury that only a few could truly understand. But none of that seemed to matter. Not here. As she reached for a handbag, on display, one that cost more than some people's monthly rent, a voice cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned to find a uniformed police officer standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable, but his posture firm. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. "Can I see some identification?" he asked, his voice professional, yet edged with something she couldn't quite place. A hush fell over the boutique. The employees stopped pretending to fold clothes. Other shoppers, dressed in designer labels and dripping in wealth, slowed there, browsing, their eyes flickering between the woman and the officer. She frowned, shifting her weight slightly. "Excuse me, I need to see some identification," the officer repeated. "We received a report about suspicious activity." Suspicious activity. The words echoed in her mind, familiar in a way that sent a cold shiver down her spine. She glanced around the store. No one else was being questioned. No one else had an officer standing in front of them, demanding proof of who they were. Her voice remained calm, steady. "Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes flicked to the handbag in her hands before returning to her face. "We received a complaint that someone matching your description has been attempting to make fraudulent purchases in high-end stores in the area." There it was, the assumption, the accusation wrapped in polite words, but heavy with meaning. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the store pressing down on her, waiting for her reaction. Would she cause a scene? Would she raise her voice? Would she do what they expected her to do? She took a slow breath, keeping her expression neutral. "I see. And what exactly about me seems suspicious?" The officer hesitated for just a second, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But she did. She had spent years reading micro-expressions, body language, the silent cues that revealed what words often concealed. "Mom, I'm just doing my job," he said, his tone clipped, as if he could already sense that this wouldn't be an easy encounter. She studied him for a moment, then reached into her designer handbag, retrieving her wallet with deliberate slowness. If there was one thing she had learned in her lifetime, it was how to move in situations like these. The officer watched closely as she pulled out a sleek black card holder and handed him her ID. He took it, his eyes scanning the name printed on it. And then, just for a split second, his expression changed. She saw it, the flicker of realization, the recognition that dawned too late, because this wasn't just any woman, and he had just made a very, very big mistake. The officer's grip tightened around the ID as his eyes flicked between the name on the card and the woman standing before him. A thin bead of tension stretched between them, almost visible in the air, his posture stiffened, his mind racing through possibilities, trying to piece together what he had just walked into. The store remained silent, the other shoppers pretending not to watch while hanging on to every second of the exchange. She could see it, the hesitation, the uncertainty creeping into his gaze. She had seen it before, countless times in different places, from different people. The moment when they realized they had misjudged her. The moment when they understood, too late, that their assumptions had led them straight into a mistake they couldn't take back. Her name carried weight, not just in this city, but far beyond. It was a name that graced magazine covers, echoed through boardrooms, was whispered with admiration, and sometimes fear in powerful circles. But none of that had mattered when she first walked in. To them, she had just been another black woman in a store she supposedly didn't belong in. The officer cleared his throat, his fingers curling slightly around her ID. "Ma'am, He stopped, as if searching for the right words, but none seemed to come. She didn't move, didn't blink. She had nothing to prove, no explanations to give. She had learned a long time ago that silence, when held correctly, was often more powerful than words. A shift in the room. One of the store employees, a manager perhaps, stepped forward, her expression uneasy. "Officer, is everything all right?" The officer hesitated for a second too long. That's when she knew. He wasn't sure what to do next. Was he going to double down, try to save face, pretend he had a reason to continue this ridiculous charade? Or was he going to admit, at least to himself, that he had made a grave miscalculation? She took a step forward, slow and deliberate, and reached out for her ID. He let it go without resistance, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment before he pulled away. She tucked it back into her wallet, her expression unreadable. "I assume we're done here." The officer swallowed, then gave a stiff nod. "Yes, ma'am," but the damage had already been done. She could still feel the weight of the stares, the unspoken thoughts pressing against her like invisible hands. Some of the customers had guilt in their eyes, as if they had realized too what had just happened. Others avoided looking at her at all, unwilling to acknowledge their own complicity. She turned without another word and walked toward the register, placing the designer handbag on the counter. The cashier, a young woman who had been watching everything unfold with wide eyes, fumbled slightly as she reached for the bag. "Would you, like to proceed with the purchase?" She smiled, but it wasn't the warm, friendly kind. It was the kind that held stories behind it. "Yes, and I'll be paying in full." As she handed over her sleek black credit card, she could feel the officer still standing there, watching her. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted to explain. But no words could erase what had happened. Because this wasn't just about one moment, one store, one officer. This was about something deeper, something bigger than either of them. And whether he realized it yet or not, this moment, this mistake, would follow him far beyond the doors of this luxury boutique. The cashier swiped her card, her hand slightly unsteady, as if she was still processing everything that had just happened. The officer hadn't moved. He lingered near the entrance, his jaw tight, his mind clearly elsewhere. Maybe he was running her name through his memory, trying to figure out why it seemed familiar. Maybe he already knew. As the receipt printed, the young cashier cleared her throat, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "Thank you for your purchase. Would you like it gift-wrapped?" She smiled, but this time it was genuine, warm. "No, thank you. I'll take it as is." She accepted the shopping bag, adjusted it in her hand, and turned toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step steady, unbothered. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to explain herself. But as she reached the door, a voice called after her. Not the officer's, someone else's. "Excuse me. She turned, her eyes landing on the store manager, the woman who had been standing quietly in the background, watching everything unfold with a mixture of discomfort and uncertainty. "I just wanted to say," the manager hesitated, glancing toward the officer, then back at her. "We're very sorry for the misunderstanding." She studied the woman for a moment, taking in the carefully chosen words. A misunderstanding. That's what they always called it. She had heard those words before, in different places, in different forms, from different people. She tilted her head slightly. "Are you?" The manager's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't have an answer for that, and that was the problem. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, stepping into the crisp evening air. The city hummed around her. Cars passing, conversations flowing, life moving forward. The officer stood at the entrance for a moment longer, watching her go, and then, finally, he reached for his radio, muttered something into it, and disappeared into the night. By the time she slid into the back seat of her sleek black car, she had already put the entire ordeal behind her. There were bigger things ahead, more important battles to fight. But she knew one thing for certain. The next time that officer saw her name, whether it was on the news, in a magazine, or attached to something far bigger than this moment, he would remember exactly who she was, and he would remember the mistake he had made.